Howdy, everybody. So today we're picking up kind of right where we left off with the Pierce lecture, talking about sectional division. So the second half of the 1850s and how all these series of events are going to slowly pull the United States apart and push us towards civil war. Now keep in mind, civil war was never inevitable. At any time, people in the United States, north, south, different political parties, all these things could have gotten together and said, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to find a new path. Well, they didn't. They chose to let all these events push them towards a civil war to become the bloodiest war the United States has ever been in. So we're going to talk about several different parts. We're going to go through this kind of quick because this is also in your reading, but we're just doing this to kind of have a visual recap of what we read. So first major thing we're going to pick up with is right where we left off with Pierce, and that is going to be the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So Stephen Douglas is kind of the brainchild of, or Kansas-Nebraska is the brainchild of Stephen Douglas. Now, Douglas, we've heard before, he was the great compromiser. He was known as the Little Giant for his oratory skills. Now, a little bit about Douglas. When Douglas got married to Adele Cutts, she was from a large plantation owning family, and as a wedding present, they were presented with a plantation with slaves, one of the biggest plantations in the area. And this is how Douglas responded. Look, if it is a blessing, it is your blessing. If it is a curse, it is your curse. Now he's talking about slavery. He's like, fine, if you like slavery, if you want to keep plantations and do all that kind of stuff, that's your business. Works for you, great. If not, who cares? But he says, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to have any association with it. He's like, let people choose to do what they want, but I'm choosing not to do anything with it. So he and his wife never accept this. And that kind of mindset of, everyone do their own thing is going to kind of guide his political vision. And that's going to guide it in the Kansas and Nebraska territories. Now, one of the big things that Douglas wants to do is become president. And he thinks if he can build a railroad, basically from Omaha, Nebraska down to Ogden, across the whole Nebraska territory, and settle Kansas and Nebraska, that'll be a big feather in his cap for becoming president. So he sets up the Kansas-Nebraska Act in kind of four major parts. So first, he uses the idea of popular sovereignty. We kind of touched on it with the Mormons before, but it's coming up again. Basically, Kansas and Nebraska as territories get to decide for themselves whether or not they want to be slave states or free states. They repeal the Missouri Compromise line. So instead of that line that says above is free, below is slave, he said we're going to do away with that. So anybody, anywhere can choose whether or not they want their state, their future state, to have slavery or not. He splits the territory, which was one giant Kansas territory, becomes now Kansas and Nebraska. In his mind, Kansas can go slave, Nebraska goes free, and it makes everybody happy. Won't quite play out that peacefully, though. And then all of his political motivations are coming into this to become president, to make a name for himself, all this kind of stuff. So there's kind of four major issues going into this whole Kansas-Nebraska Act. And you kind of see people, how they're reacting to it. It feels like for the free soilers that slavery is being forced upon them. This territory that was once in the Missouri Compromise guaranteed to be slave-free is now open to slavery and starting this race to make Kansas a slave state or a free state, this race between the two factions. And in the midst of all this, you have the Republican Party coming together. Now, the Republicans are basically a conglomeration of every other little group that had fallen apart up to this point. So the three major parties that make up the new Republican Party are the Liberty Party, that had been anti-slavery, so wanting abolition, the Free Soil Party, which wanted all that Western territory, not so much to end slavery, but no slavery in that territory, so it's for free white people. And then the Whig Party. Remember, the Whigs, the only reason they were ever created was because they all hated Andrew Jackson. So all these three parties weren't powerful enough on their own, but combine them, and they become a much more powerful Republican Party. This is the same Republican Party we have today. Now, their party platform, they were really fighting for was to stop the expansion of slavery. So not to end slavery, just to stop its expansion so it wouldn't spread anymore across the United States. But in Kansas, this Kansas-Nebraska Act, this popular sovereignty idea, is going to erupt in conflict into a series of events that are going to be known collectively as Bleeding Kansas. Now, Henry Ward Beecher, the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, is going to send crates labeled Bibles down to Kansas to help the abolitionists, to help the Northerners in Kansas kind of fight off the pro-slavery Southerners. You might ask, how might Bibles work for this thing? You're going to convert them to a different mindset? Well, while he might have been a preacher himself, Beecher also knew that other things were necessary to spread the correct word. When you open these crates, they were full of Sharp's rifles, not Bibles. So they labeled them Bibles, and they were nicknamed Beecher's Bibles, but they were actually rifles used to fight the Southerners. So you see these tensions are bubbling up on both sides. Now, David Atchison, who was a prominent politician at the time, says this about Kansas. He says there are 1,100 coming from Platte County, Missouri to vote. That means Missourians going into Kansas just for the day to vote. And if that ain't enough, we can send 5,000. Enough to kill every goddamned abolitionist in the state. So you have a sitting politician saying we are going to cheat in an election, and if that doesn't work, we'll kill them until we win. So you can see the vibe going on by the time they get to 1855, 56, getting closer and closer to that Civil War. People are willing to turn to murder, to violence, to get things their way. And this is what this mindset leads into what's called the sack of Lawrence, Kansas. So Lawrence was a northern outpost. It was kind of a stronghold of anti-slavery groups. So Southerners attack it and sack the city. So destroy big chunks of the city, burn down some of the more prominent buildings, kill a few people. It's bad. So for a brief period, the Northerners have the moral high ground, saying, look what Southerners do, look what slavery does, this is awful. But this moral high ground, unfortunately, is short-lived. This is where we see John Brown kind of come into his own for the first major time. Now, John Brown had tried to do a lot of things in his life. None of them really worked except having kids. He had a whole buttload of kids. Now, John Brown believed he heard the voice of God, and that voice was telling him to eradicate slavery by any means necessary. So he, some of his sons, and some of his followers go to Pottawatomie Creek, a little pro-slavery outpost. Now keep in mind, none of these people living in this little town, this little area, owned slaves. They were Southerners, they might have been sympathetic to slavery, but none of them actually owned slaves. In the middle of the night, John Brown and his sons and supporters kicked open these guys' doors, middle of the night in front of their families, pulled them out in front of their houses, and began to hack their heads off with broadswords. See if this will, nope. With broadswords. So this goes very biblical, very quickly, and it's just a very brutal example. So much so that John Brown had to go into hiding after committing such an atrocity. You kind of see this image, this mural of John Brown. He's kind of this harbinger of what is to come, the greater violence that's going to erupt between North and South. Then we get to the U.S. Congress, the highest governmental offices in the land, where civility and order are supposed to play out. And things are going to go even worse. So this all starts with Charles Sumner. So you have a Republican senator from Massachusetts named Charles Sumner. He's very anti-slavery. And in one of his big speeches about Kansas, called The Crimes Against Kansas, he rails against what's going on in Kansas. In particular, though, he targets Andrew Butler, who was a pro-slavery, ardent Southerner, all this kinds of stuff. Now, Butler recently had a stroke, and every time he tried to speak, he would tend to drool or spit up a little bit because he couldn't control part of his face. So what Sumner decided to do was just tack that on in his lambasting speech, saying, oh, look what slavery does to you. He was stricken by God, condemned for his evil ways, and he basically just ridicules Butler halfway through this whole speech. And that's when Preston Brooks, a cousin, a relative of Butler, hears about this And while Butler was in no physical shape to defend himself, Brooks decides, who also is a sitting congressperson, that he's going to take it upon himself to restore his family's honor. So he goes into the Senate chambers and proceeds to meet with Charles Sumner. Now, this is not a civil meeting. He had no intention of it being a civil meeting. Instead, he walked up to Charles Sumner while Sumner was working at his desk. Other Southern senators blocked a ring around Sumner, and Preston Brooks began to beat Sumner half to death. Like literally half to death. It took him several months to over a year to begin to fully recover and retake his position in Congress. And this is a brutal, brutal beating. So this is attempted murder in any kind of real interpretation of this. So if one of us did this today, if someone like us did this, we would be in jail immediately, all this kind of stuff. What happens is Brooks quits and goes home. He says, nope, screw it, I'm out, and just goes home, goes to his home state. Well, now there's a vacancy in his position in Congress. So they have a quick election, and lo and behold, who do they elect? Preston Brooks, back to the same position. And they don't only elect him again, but they send gold-plated canes and golden whips to him, saying, next time, finish the job. Don't stop at a beating. Kill the Northern bastard next time. So this is the mindset that we have between North and South. Not only is it enough to oppose someone politically, but we must kill them. And that led us down this winding, dangerous path towards a civil war. So in 1856, at the height of all these tensions, you have a new election where James Buchanan is going to win. Now, Buchanan is not going to be great for the nation. He is very ardently a Southerner, very pro-slavery, pro-Southern ideals, and this is going to show and push the nation further and further apart. Now, the Republicans are going to notice something about this election. You can kind of see this in the Electoral College vote, but you see a little bit in the popular vote. The North got a third of both the Electoral College and the popular vote, with only having a handful of northern states. So if they were able to win every northern state, add Illinois, Indiana, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, that's about it. If you get all those, you would have enough votes to win without a single Southern vote. So this becomes the plan for the Republicans. They abandon the South and say, 1860, we're only campaigning in the North. We're going to push the North really hard, and that's what's going to let us win. So 1856, kind of first big Republican campaign, big Republican election. They lose by a handy margin, but it teaches them an important lesson, that they can win without a single Southern vote. So you had John C. Fremont for the Republicans, James Buchanan for the Democrats, and then you had Millard Fillmore running again for the American or Know Nothing or Whig Party, kind of the remnants of some of these things. You can read more about the Know Nothings in your book. They're more of an anti-immigrant kind of thing. Instead of dealing with the actual issues like slavery, they just want to blame immigrants for the problems. But the first big case that's going to pop up during Buchanan's term is the Dred Scott decision. So you can read more of the details of it in the book, but we will talk a little bit about it here. So basically, Dred Scott was a slave that was taken by an army officer into Northern Territory. Officer dies, leaving Dred Scott in kind of limbo. Is he a free man now because he had lived so long in free territory? Or is he still property and goes to the next of kin? Now, luckily for Dred Scott, the next of kin was a northern woman who was married to an abolitionist, so he was probably going to gain his freedom. But other abolitionists thought this would be a great court case to try and prove that by living in free territory, slaves became free. Now, James Buchanan steps in and tries to influence the Supreme Court, because this court case goes through kind of the local courts and works its way up to the Supreme Court. And James Buchanan sticks his nose in and tries to tell the Supreme Court, yeah, maybe you should vote against Dred Scott. Maybe don't support the slave and go a different way. Now, Roger B. Taney, who, if you remember, had some stuff going on with Andrew Jackson a while back and has now become, by this point, Supreme Court Chief Justice, has some unique things to say about the Dred Scott decision. So first, he said slaves are property, and property cannot use the courts. Now, if that's the case, this is all he should have to say. The court case should be thrown out, and nothing else has to be said. But Tawney takes this opportunity to go further. He said Dred Scott is not free by living in free territory because the Missouri Compromise is unconstitutional. Now, if you remember, in the previous lecture, we talked about how the Compromise of 1850 repealed, or sorry, not the Compromise of 1850, the Kansas-Nebraska Act repealed the Missouri Compromise. So, doesn't really have effect, but he goes on and says that was unconstitutional. And he goes on and says slaves are property. Property can be taken anywhere. So basically saying you might have a free state or you might have a free territory, but it doesn't matter because slaves are property and the government has to protect property everywhere. So basically saying slavery can exist anywhere and everywhere within the United States. And this is going to drive Northerners off the deep end. This is going to piss a lot of people off. Now, Buchanan's happy, but not many other people are. Then you have Robert Walker, going back to Kansas. He has been appointed the territorial governor of Kansas, and he's overseeing the election for the Kansas government, since enough people have flooded in trying to fight for pro-slavery or pro-free. And Walker, for his credit, does want to do a good job, does want this to be a fair election. So you have two proposed constitutions, the Compton Constitution, which is pro-slavery, and the Topeka Constitution, which is pro-free. Now, this very quickly turns into a very shady election. Ballots are stuffed, everybody's cheating, particularly the pro-slavery people are cheating a lot. You'll have election rolls where just alphabetically a bunch of dead people are voting, and people are just stuffing ballots left and right. More people vote for the Kansas Constitution than people that are actually in Kansas somehow. So this is corrupt. And when this goes to Congress for ratification, what Walker does is he sends a letter with it saying, please don't ratify the state government because it was super corrupt. Buchanan, however, steps in. Now, Lecompton won the vote, although they cheated, the pro-slavery people cheated. But Buchanan says, you should pass the Lecompton Constitution, you should make it a slave state. So again, he's stepping over his bounds. First, he tried to tell the Supreme Court what to do. Now, the president's trying to tell Congress what to do. So he is looking bad left and right. But Congress, to its credit, is like, nope, this looks shady. They take Walker's advice and they postpone Kansas statehood. And it won't become a state until during the Civil War. This is where we get Abraham Lincoln's rise to prominence. So by this point, he's grown his beard. He thought he was a very ugly man. He thought the beard kind of softened his visage. Now, we have to figure out is what Abraham Lincoln believed. So we often think of Lincoln as the great emancipator. So let's look at some of the things that Lincoln said and kind of what he did in this process. So how he felt about slavery is kind of the big question. So he says, I surely will not blame them for not knowing what I should not know how to do myself. If all earthly power were given to me, I should not know what to do with the existing institution. So asked about slavery, he's like, I don't know. I have no idea. I have no good solution for this. But he goes on. He says, my first impulse would be to free all the slaves and send them to Liberia, to their own native land. So he's saying, okay, I'm not opposed to freeing slaves, but black and white people can't live together. So we should send them back to Africa, to that colony we established of Liberia in that American Colonization Society. Now, that doesn't exactly sound like the Lincoln we think of whenever we think of the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, and all that. So, not exactly perfect yet. Now, Lincoln is going to really make a name for himself during the Lincoln-Douglas debates. So he was campaigning for senator in Illinois, but he couldn't get a lot of traction. And he couldn't get a lot of attention for himself, so what he did was challenge Douglas, who was the other senator or campaigning for the position in Illinois. So he's going to attack Stephen Douglas. So Stephen Douglas was famously popular, so he's like, I'll challenge him to debates, and that'll give me a lot of recognition without looking shady. Now, at these debates, Lincoln is going to say some interesting things. So, in the northern part of Illinois, this is what Lincoln had to say about slavery. Let us discard all this squabbling about this man and the other man, this race and that race, and the other race being inferior. Let us discard all these things and unite as one people throughout this land till we shall once more stand up, declaring all men are created equal. Now, this sounds like the Lincoln we know, one we know and love. Down with slavery, Emancipation Proclamation, 13th Amendment, end all slavery, great, awesome. A few weeks later, when having a debate in the southern portion of Illinois, I will say this then, that I am not nor have ever been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. I am not nor have ever been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor qualifying them to hold office, nor intermarry with white people, inasmuch as while they remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. Now, what the hell does this mean? Right here, he was just saying we're all created equal. Here, we're saying white people are better. But you got to think about this. Lincoln, first and foremost, despite his wonderful ideals, he is a politician. In the northern part of the state, that's more anti-slavery, he's going to say more anti-slavery stuff. In the southern part of the state, that's more pro-slavery, he's going to say more pro-slavery stuff. At least more pro-white supremacy stuff. So he's playing the politics. He's trying to make himself sound appealing to the voters. Now, that is not to say that he believes one or the other, and we will see as president during the Civil War what his actual beliefs are, particularly after he talks to abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, and he truly understands what slavery is and what it means for the black race and all these kinds of things. So we will see him evolve towards a point, and that's what we have to understand about Lincoln, is that it's an evolution. You can have an idea, you can think it's a good idea, then new information comes in and you can change that idea. That's perfectly okay. As long as you explain your thought process and be like, okay, I thought this, now I got this new information, and now I think this other thing. And that's exactly what he's going to do during the Civil War. Now for Douglas, Douglas is going to make a crucial error during his campaign. He'll win the position of senator for Illinois, but he loses on the national scene for some important ways. So basically, Lincoln kind of pins Douglas down and forces Douglas to choose something on the issue of slavery. So first and foremost, he forces Douglas to say popular sovereignty. Say, I believe in popular sovereignty, people can choose, so on and so forth, and says that the Dred Scott case kind of proves that popular sovereignty is the only path. That a state or a territory can either pass laws to protect slavery or not pass laws to protect it, and that's the only way slavery cannot survive in a state. States will choose through their laws. Now, the problem with this kind of statement, this Freeport Doctrine, is it kind of alienates everybody. The Northerners hate it because it doesn't guarantee free territory. The Southerners hate it because it doesn't guarantee slave territory. It's kind of this wishy-washy middle ground that no one's happy with. And it's ultimately going to cost Douglas any real chance at the presidency in 1860. So Lincoln is going to become this prominent figure across the nation, and in the 1860s, he's going to become the main Republican candidate, the only real option for the presidency in the Republican Party. So kind of his best summed up, he's kind of seeing the future of the nation. He says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. So he said the whole thing will go slavery or the whole thing will go free, but we're going to have to figure it out. We can't serve two masters. So he doesn't think a civil war is going to happen, but that's what's going to take. Unfortunately, it take this brutal, bloody civil war that we'll learn more about later to actually resolve this issue of slavery. So we got a few more major events to talk about before we Finish up with the 1850s. So you have John Brown and the raid on Harper's Ferry, 1859. So John Brown is back. A few years in hiding. He's supported by prominent abolitionists. He gets the bright idea. He's going to start a race war. And to do that, he needs weapons. So he attacks an arsenal, a U.S. government arsenal, where we store all our weapons in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. So he and some of his sons and supporters attack the arsenal, very quickly take it over. Troops surround it, and it's not going to go well. The big error in his plan, they get all the weapons, but they never told any slaves to come out during this kind of big event to take up arms and start the race war. So they had the weapons, but no African Americans to start the race war. So it goes very poorly. Some of his sons are going to be killed as the U.S. Army storms the arsenal, and he's going to be arrested. Now, very quickly, Virginia actually seizes control. Even though this is a federal arsenal, so it should be the federal government taking charge of this, Virginia is actually going to be the one to put him on trial. This is going to look bad. It's going to look like a kangaroo court. This kind of dummy court just to very quickly execute someone who's not popular with their beliefs. Now, John Brown is okay with this, surprisingly. He says, I will do more for my cause with my death than I ever did with my life. And he really was correct on this point. His execution made him a martyr for his cause. People rallied to his banner. They may not have liked the way he was doing it, but they believed in what he did. And this is the fundamental problem with what's going on. People are becoming radicalized on both sides. Both North and South are seeing kind of this line in the sand that neither are willing to cross. The final big, or second to last big issue is the Texas Troubles. Random fires in 1860 start breaking out across North Texas, in places like Denton and Dallas. And no one knows why. So good paranoid Texans believe it is probably slaves and abolitionists trying to kill them, showing the paranoia of the time. Now, in reality, it was faulty phosphorus matches that were just combusting in the Texas heat. But nonetheless, several slaves will be killed, abolitionists will be beaten and run out of the state, but it shows the paranoia of the time. The final blow to the Union is the election of 1860. We have four major candidates. So Abraham Lincoln for the Republican, John Breckinridge for the Southern Democrats, the Northern Democrats put Stephen Douglas, and the Constitutional Union put John Bell. So the Constitutional Union Party is basically the guys in the middle saying, come on, let's just get along, let's hug it out, we'll just focus on the Constitution and be great friends. Now, if you notice, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee are the ones voting for it. They know if a war happens, they're going to be at the heart of it. The Democrats split North and South, mainly because of what Douglas had said during the debates that we talked about. A lot of Southerners weren't thrilled with it. Breckinridge in the South said, slavery today, slavery tomorrow, slavery forever. So always protect the institution of slavery. Lincoln, all he said was no expansion of slavery. And the Republicans, remember, their plan was to focus only on northern states. And you can see in this election, that is going to work expertly. The southern states did not even put Lincoln on the ballot. So Lincoln's able to win the whole election without a single southern vote. Now think about this. You're a southerner, you went and voted, and on the ballot were three candidates, Breckinridge, Bell, and Douglas. You pick one of those three. Then a few weeks later, the election results come out, and Lincoln wins. It feels like a guy that wasn't even on your ballot has just won the election, and this is the last straw. A lot of Southerners, a lot of Southern states see this as a breaking point and are going to push for secession and ultimately civil war. But we'll stop there for today, and we'll pick up with the Civil War later.